Well, guys, today in the third, we've been talking about a legacy. And what's a legacy? A legacy is what you leave behind you. It's what you leave for those who come after you. And really, all of us are leaving a spiritual legacy. The question we have to ask is, what does ours say? Are people inspired by our lives? Are we passing down to the people who come after us something they want to follow, something that will guide them and lead them? Are we giving to those that follow after us a legacy of our faith, a legacy of what God has done in us that we can support through them? Today we're talking specifically, it kind of fits in regards to our child dedication. Listen. Today we're talking specifically about the following generation, about passing on a living legacy of our faith to the following generations, that which comes after us. Why? Because it says in Psalm 127, look at this scripture with me. It says, children are a heritage from the Lord. A heritage is an inheritance, what you receive. See, offspring are a reward from Him. God has chosen you and I in the households that we have, in the opportunities that we as human beings have to bear children into this world, the opportunity to work cooperatively with God, to see that the next generation know Him, understand Him, and live out their faith. Because why? Because God is not a grandfather. God doesn't have grandchildren. Every generation must come to know God personally and intimately for themselves. And so therefore, if you're taking notes with me this morning, listen, this is critical for us to understand that the most primary responsibility of parenting is to impart a living faith to our children. The most primary responsibility of parenting is to impart a living, and I worded that correctly that way, a living faith to our children. Not just something that we've done because the generations before us have done, but every generation has a responsibility to connect and to know God personally, intimately, for themselves. And I know with all of this, because today's message is not to invoke any level of guilt or stress upon parents, because I'm a fellow journeyer with you. Kathy and I have a 14 and a 12-year-old in our household. We are by no means experts in any way, shape, or form. We are fellow sojourners, fellow journeyers of living out this reality of how do we impart, listen, a living faith. And as parents, we become overwhelmed with responsibilities, because when we think about our children, one of the primary responsibilities that come, or ideas that come to us, is responsibility. We're responsible to care for our kids, to provide for our kids. We think of our houses that we have. We think about good educations. We think about clothes and all the other things. But the most important, the most fundamental is what I want to talk about today. And so many times in parents, we all struggle. We all battle this. Okay? Don't think I'm exempt from this. I deal with the same pressures that every other parent in this building deals with. And here today, guys, my message is not just alone to parents, because every one of us, as we covenanted together with families, can play a role of influencing kids. Because probably in your families, you have cousins, you have nieces or nephews, you have children that you interact with at some place or some part. And guess what? If you're not in that way, there's kids here in this church that the things that you've learned in your life, what God's doing in you, you can help instill and impart to others as a part of God's unique work of working together. But as parents, we can feel so inadequate, so overwhelmed. Really, we're supposed to be able to provide to our kids the responsibilities of a living faith. And yeah, here's the deal. All of us, as we bring up our children, it's this end, is that we are to help them understand what we ourselves are living out for ourselves. See, in the real time, in our family, when Kathy and I began our parenting years, I had the opportunity, we started parenting a little bit later in our walk. That's why we have a 14 and a 12-year-old at home. But listen, through the course of it, I learned, I'm a sponge. I try to ask people. I see people who have done a great job in raising their kids. Hey, there's things I can learn from you, things I can take away from you, what worked and what didn't. And one of the things that we don't practice in our house Straight up, I'm the pastor. We don't have a formal devotional time as a family where we sit down and go, we're going to study the Bible together. You know why I didn't do that? Because what I had experienced is that was an epic fail in a lot of families. Because you know why? Faith became structured in this regard. It became formalistic. It became this way that, okay, now departing from all the realities of life, now let's put on a different hat and talk about it in an academic reality. Whereas faith is a living and organic reality. So in the Vance household, the way we look in everyday things, every aspect of life, see, we live out our faith in real time. So how do we impart to our children? We do so in real time. Like yesterday, I was doing my son's science experiment with him together for his school project that we're working through for the science fair in the school that he goes through. And so in that time, an opportunity arose. So I had, because one of the things that I'm very, very cognizant of is this, that my children adapt a faith that is their own. And I talked to my boys all about that. I said, you know, our hope is your mom and your dad, we are followers of Jesus, that you would choose to follow Jesus, but that you would believe in him, not because mom and dad do, but because you know why. You understand. Why does what Christianity teach that, outshine all other world faith systems? Because what I explain to my children is this: every human being is important to God. Every human being owes the dignity and understanding of how important they are. But you need to recognize that you will face people in your life that do not, the overwhelming majority of people that you will face in your life will not believe the way you believe. And how will you respond? How will you deal with those times? Will you go quiet? Or will you be influential to help people to know why you've come to believe in Jesus, and how this is a belief system for all people, for all areas? Because I said, son, there are people who believe so passionately in what they believe that they sacrifice their lives for it. But why do we believe, or why do you believe in Jesus? Why is this significant? See, we need to train our children with the understanding that they are to live out and navigate a world that doesn't believe the way they do. But why? Is this a superior belief system for them individually? And why is it good news that they can share with other people? Because unless your faith is alive, then it's just a dead tradition that's passed down from one generation to another, and you have no way of defending, no way of believing, no way of saying, this is why I believe what I believe. Because when you line up Christianity with all of the belief systems in the world, all of the belief systems in the world point to the fact of trying to be good, that heaven is for good people. But you see, Christianity is the only one that doesn't teach that. Christianity never taught that heaven is for good people, because the Bible actually taught the opposite, that no one on the earth is good. Nobody has perfectly lived out their lives. Nobody deserves what God did for them. But God took the responsibility of the sin of humanity personal, and he gave his very son to die. So Christianity is not about what you do. It's about what's been done. It's wrapping your faith around a God who gives us exactly what we don't deserve. Where else do you find that news on the face of the planet? Where else do you find a God who is compassionate? See, but that's what I want my children to experience and to understand. But a part of that has to be lived out in the way we live our lives. How we talk about this, how we deal with it, how we interact as families. Because guess what, guys? We live in societies where we don't gain a lot of support by the structures that once supported our belief systems. If your kids attend public school, hey, that's fine. I'm not here to say yay or nay, okay? Here's the deal that it is. You have to recognize that even the best of teachers out there recognize that in the environment of the public system, that it has to be a neutral zone. They can't talk about faith. Because the laws of our society today separate church and state as they see it in that end. So we have to look for the opportunities to recognize I'm not going to find a partnership there. So how do I instill? In fact, you know, one of the fascinating things is a pet peeve of mine. Why is we as parents, we think about education for our kids and we spend buku money on college, because we want to give our kids a good college education. And sometimes we send our kids to colleges that will absolutely do everything to beat out of your child everything you've tried to put into your child for 18 years. Try to convince your child that everything that they believe. But have we left them with the ability to even talk articulately, passionately, and confidently with the reasons for what they believe? You see, this is what I want to talk to you about, and I don't want to here's the message. The message is not to induce guilt or stress, but to help. So how do you actually impart it? Because you know why? When we start thinking about, oh my goodness, we have the responsibility of bringing our children up with faith. Because what happens in our current society, what happens is this. A lot of times after college, people who might have been raised in some level of church, they find their career path, they find the person they're marrying, and church doesn't become a regular part of life. And then all of a sudden, these kids come along, and the question arises, oh my goodness, what do I do about my kids? Do I bring them up with nothing? And so we literally sometimes drag our kids to church. We hope that it's not that end, but like my parents did with me and nothing. My parents didn't know any better. Maybe your parents didn't know any better. Maybe you don't know any better. Here's the deal. What I want to tell you today is that you're not alone, okay? That there is hope in this end, because listen, my parents had me go through catechism. My parents had me go through this, but here's the deal. If what we learn at church isn't what we embrace as a family, then it will never actually work. And this is the wisdom of God. If you have a Bible today, listen to me. I want you to find the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. Because how do you actually leave a spiritual heritage to your children? I want to give you a simple understanding. God made it clear. God made it so plain, so simple. But sometimes we miss this. Sometimes we don't see it. And listen, if you're new to Bible reading, all you have to do, find the beginning of the book. Just find the beginning of the Bible. Deuteronomy's the 5th book. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and you'll be in Deuteronomy 6. Let me help you to where this is at. Moses, as we talked about last week, Moses had a responsibility far more than just bringing the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery, out of captivity, and into a promised land. Moses had the responsibility from God for leaving a legacy to the coming generations that would be after him. And more than the tabernacle that he had created, Moses was the first one that God gave the responsibility of actually putting into writing the wisdom of God. You see, generations prior to Moses, some did a good job, some didn't do a good job about bringing up their kids with a living faith. How do you impart it? So God wanted to have it recorded so that we would maybe have the boldness and courage. And let me talk to the guys for a minute, because if you're a guy like me, I'll tell you, I fess up on myself. Whenever there's something to build, there's ever something to do, I usually tear into it and start doing it, okay? Until it's not all coming together as easy as I thought it was. And then humbly, without anybody else knowing, I have to go to the instruction manual and recognize, oh, that's what I was missing. And you value a manual when you're put on the spot. And God gave us a manual because all of our children came from God. And this is the owner's manual because your children are from God. They're really lent to you by God, but they belong to God. And so in essence, God gives us the instruction manual. How do you actually pass on a living faith? How do you actually instill in the next generation this? And this is what because Moses had to deal with a culture of people that were raised in captivity. In other words, they didn't even have the freedom to worship God in the manner in which they felt. So now, he has this instruction. Now record for them how that in every facet of life, God is at the center of your lives. Not an extraneous thing that you do on Sunday morning, but how is God a part of everyday life? How is the center of everything? This was Moses' responsibility to impart to the generations to follow. And so this is what he said. Deuteronomy 6:4, and look at what it says. Probably the most familiar passage in the Old Testament, especially if you're a Hebrew. He said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Now, this has been interpreted and taken by different ones in generations behind. Many of the Jews ascribe this as the primary teaching for monotheism. In other words, there's only one God, and that is true. But what we struggle with, and here's where people who come into the New Testament and Christianity and see a fuller picture of God, it was always in the Old Testament. Let me help you with something for a moment. It was always in the Old Testament. But people struggle with the idea of what we call the doctrine of the Trinity, that there's a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the three are together, they're one, but yet they're God. People say, well, no, that's polytheism. That's more than one God. No, here's the deal. It was always in the Old Testament. Listen to me. When God made man, he said, let us make man in our image. Now, who was God talking to? I mean, was he schizophrenic? Did he not understand? Did he have multiple personalities? No, God, there was always this unity in the Trinity. And here what's fascinating, actually, when you study the Bible, you recognize, see the word one? It was also used in Genesis 2:27 when God was giving the pattern for marriage. He said that, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. Now, when two people get married, okay, do they no longer have an individual body anymore? No, but his intent was that two people would learn to live like they're one. Why? Because that's how God lives. God lives in perfect unity, and the word one is the same. So there is unity in this end, but let me help you, give you a very clearer or more deeper understanding. Because all of the interpretations through the course of this text can all be good in the right setting, but let me give you the most important of all. He said, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. Notice that he said, our God. Okay? The Lord our God. That God intended we would have a relationship with him. The Lord our God. The Lord is one. In other words, God comes first. He's supreme. He's number one in every facet of life. And that's why when we've called through the course of this series, I started talking about the idea, what does a life look like that puts God first? Because whenever God's first, everything after it's blessed. We talked about the principle of tithing, we talked about others, but listen to me, guys. God was instructing Moses with this understanding. Whenever God is first in priority, everything else is blessed. And therefore, in your households, if you want the blessing of God to be unlimited in your household, let God be supreme. Let God, in other words, be the first priority of the way you live and the way you rear your children and run your lives. God comes first. And then he went on to say this in verse 5. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. In other words, God said to them, the relationship that I am forming with you, I want to be formed on this, love. I never want you to follow me because you are scared of me. I don't want you to follow me because it is your obligation to follow me. In other words, God wanted a relationship that was bound in love, listen to me, not in law. Well, you say, well, Moses, wasn't he the lawgiver? But God wanted the understanding, because here's the deal. Let me tell you this. We all experience this because when we love in life, the greatest gift of love is to honor somebody else for who they are and to give of your life to meet their need as they give of their life to meet your need. So if God, if his character, if his nature is this way, then the only appropriate way to love God is to honor him in the way you live your life. Not because you have to, but because you want to. And that's the question. Because, you see, if you have to, then what you're following is law. And you know what law leads to? A dead faith. We do this because we have to. See, God intended that the only manner in which he ever designed or desired humanity to engage him was because they would love him. Because they would know who he was and know that anything he had for their life was always for their best, always for their good, to trust in him enough to love him with their very lives. And not attempt to live life by their own understanding, but to live life out of God's wisdom, out of God's plan, out of God's purpose, out of a relationship. And so here's the deal, folks. When we raise our kids, God intended that your children would see you live a life that responds to God out of love. But how do we impart to our kids? You can't do this. Do our kids hear out of us law? Or do we hear out of us a life that says, because I love God, I have chosen to live my life in this fashion. Because I love God, I have chosen of my own free will, just as I made the commitment to love your mother. And therefore, because I love your mother, do I have the freedom to go out and cheat on your mother? Do I have the freedom to dishonor your mother? Oh, I may have the freedom, but love constrains me. Love compels me that no, I would never, because I love your mother, I would never in 1,000 years do that to the one that I love. In other words, if we are to impart to God a living faith and to those that come after us the same, then what we do for God should always be born out of the reality of love. But listen to me. Israel missed it on this end because they became caught up in the law. And it all became about the law. And as a parent, I'll tell you, it's far easier to parent being a legalist. You know why? Because you can go on autopilot. As a legalist, you can simply say, in our house, we don't go to we don't go to R-rated movies. And generally, that's usually good, but listen to me. You hold your rocks, but I showed my kids The Passion of the Christ. And guess what? It's rated R. If I was by a legalistic terminology on that front, okay, you could turn around and say as a legalist, listen, all secular music is wrong, all these influences are wrong, all that is wrong, and we don't do that in this house. Boom, and you know what happens? You know why that fails so often? Is because not everything in culture is evil, and not everything in culture is bad. And if you don't actually see, what I encourage people to do is to parent as life-giving. Because if it's about right and wrong, that always brings death. But if it's about what produces life, but here's the part of it, and I'll be honest with you, it's harder to parent life-giving. Because Jesus told us we're in the world, we're just not of it. In other words, we need to navigate and help our children to know what is good, what is praiseworthy in the culture that we live in. Because if you attempt to raise your kid as a legalist, they can't stand on that when they're on their own in the world and they don't get it, they don't understand it, and all the people around them think they're small-minded, narrow-minded on this end. And maybe sometimes that's true. Unless you're raising your kid to live in a cave or live in a hole in the ground or live in a bomb shelter waiting for Jesus to come and get us out of here. That's why we've had no influence upon culture. Because, see, when I listen to music with my kids, I say, hey, whoa, good tune, but what are they actually saying? Let's talk about that for a moment. What does that support? Is that something we should embrace, or is that something, oh, wow, that's great, listen to that. That actually reflects the values that we hold. See, the question is, you can have great communication and instill wisdom in your children. Because listen, this is what God's plan. Look at verse 6. God said this, these commandments that I give you today are to be in your heart. See, they should navigate the way in which we live our lives. Because why? He goes on to say, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. In other words, God was saying this, guys, it's living it out in real time. That's how we interact in this in our home. And what he wanted to do, the word impress, now, old King James language, it said teach your children. Some ones say impart to your children, some translations. But impress, here's what the word literally means. To make a mark that will bear it's such an impression upon your kids that will last. It's a lesson that lasts for a lifetime. And how do you do that? How do you leave a living legacy of your faith? Here's two realities I gave you. Leaving this end, number one, and this is critical. Listen. How do you leave a spiritual heritage? By modeling a life guided, strengthened, and inspired by one's faith. In other words, guys, you can't give to your kids what you don't have. In other words, it can never be in our household, do as I say, not as I do. If you want to know one of the biggest reasons why kids walk away from it, because they see this disconnect, where we live one way at home and then we put on church on Sunday. But you see, living and modeling is this end, because listen to me, let me give you some relief, parents. You don't have to be perfect. In fact, if you ever tried to present to your children a perfected lifestyle, then you dishonor them because it's inauthentic. Being authentic, see, living and modeling to your kids requires transparency. In other words, be honest with your kids about your own struggles. Be honest with your kids about your own mistakes. Be honest with your kids about your own struggles and how you take it to your faith to deal with it. When other people are mean to you, when other people have dishonored you, when other people have disrespected you, and you're angry, you're upset, then they need to see you modeling a lifestyle of grace and love and forgiveness and not holding against others. Not separating, oh, they hurt us, so I separate myself from among others. No. That you teach your children to walk in love and walk above and not beneath. To forgive and to let go. To live out a vital and guided lifestyle by our faith represents a value system that we live out. In other words, when you make a mistake and you dishonor your wife or the wife dishonors your husband, you take responsibility for it. And you not only apologize to the spouse, but you apologize to the children. Ooh, he's talking about humility. Yeah. Because here's the deal, what we haven't seen. See, growing up, we went to church on Sunday. But values like that, and my parents were good people, don't get me wrong, I'm not disparaging it. They might not have even known. The only way to impart is to live out, because if you are a follower, you can't give what you don't have. And here, guys, there's always hope. You can always begin somewhere. If you're presently not a follower of Jesus, you can become one today. And then begin with your kids right where you're at. Why did you turn? Why did you trust Jesus? Because you realized that religion wasn't going to get me to heaven. That only a relationship with Jesus. And Jesus took me in my mess with all of my failures, with all of my shortcomings, with all of my sins and all of my junk. Jesus loved me in spite of it, and he'll love you in spite of it. Because guess what, son, daughter, you know about mom and dad's weaknesses better than the people from church even know. And guess what, I need Jesus. And maybe they'll just say, amen. We knew that. Just waited and wanted to know you knew that. But you see, modeling it, because does your faith guide you? You see, when you make decisions in your household, do your kids ever even hear you pray? I mean, besides, saying grace over dinner. Do your kids ever hear you pray? Do your kids ever hear you as a couple deciding, how are we going to deal with these things? And if you're a single parent, trust me, those are the most important times. Let God be that ever-present source of help to you. Let church be that strength to you. See, what I want you to recognize through this, you are not alone. Don't ever feel that you're alone in this. You're not alone. But modeling it is a life of dependency upon God. That God is there for you. That he's my guidance. He's my strength. See, allowing your kids to recognize what you're vulnerable to. Having some honest discussion. Hey, this is what dad struggles with. Son, daughter, this is my deal. I constantly have to go to God to help me on this front. In fact, you can help me. Pray for dad on this front. Oh, I would never show weakness to my kids. Trust me, they already know it. And because you don't admit it, they see what? They see inauthenticity. They see is this faith something that's a pretending game? Is this something that you go to church and pretend to be one thing? And you come home and we know the other side of the story. Okay? I got Dr. Jekyll at home. And everyone, or Diablo, I don't remember which one's the bad one here, but we got the other side of it. Okay? No, guys, modeling authenticity, because secondly, listen. Because our faith should inspire us. See, we should impress upon them. It means to make a lasting impact. You see, when your kids see you through hard decisions of life, when they know the pressure's on you, turning your faith to God, you leave life lessons that forever will stay with them. When they've seen relatives disregard you, because of the way you've handled your areas of your life, and they see you, because of your faith, make decisions not to respond as other people respond, you leave life impressions upon your children. It marks them. And then the second one is this, through instruction in everyday life. That's the way I look about it. See, one of the primary ways in the Vance household that we deal with this with our kids is through life. See, I look at news reports, I look at all the different things, how we can, whether it's at the dinner table, whether we're driving in the car. That's what Moses was telling them. Listen, guys, all day long, your faith, if it's a vital part of who you are, what you are, if it guides, strengthens, inspires your life, then it should be a part of everyday conversations. And so I look for opportunities. Hey, guys, let's talk about this. I'll tell them, listen, one of the things vocationally, I'm a pastor. And you know what that means? I deal with people's problems. And so I tell my kids about the problems that people deal with. I just change the names and the stories so they don't know who I'm talking about. But I tell my kids about real life. These are real life situations. How can we learn from this? How can we as a family draw deeper into God so that through these ends we can pray for the people who are struggling with them and we can learn the lessons of life, how we as a family can avoid those types of situations. But they're great opportunities to talk through life. See, that's the instructions. You have to wait for those. See, if you formalize it and you say, okay, at 7:30, we're going to have devotions, and that's the only time we talk about spiritual matters in the house, then what you've done is compartmentalized religion to your kids. But if it's faith, if it's life, then it's in every day. When you're sweeping the garage, when you're washing the car, when you're asking for help around the house and imparting to them the understandings. See, it should be something that you should be transparent with your kids. Hey, we're not going to spend money on this because we want to live by a biblical model. We know that to be a debtor is to be a slave to someone else, and we're not going there. Okay, as a family, these are why we live our lives. This is why we do what we do. We want you to understand it now because the pitfalls of this are everywhere. And when you start to navigate your own life, learn the lessons that we're learning. See, that's what it is. So here's the deal, parents, you're not alone in this. What I want to then talk to you is about how does the church partner together with parents in what you're doing? How do we come alongside? Because here's the philosophy that we embrace at the church. We call it an orange philosophy. And what do we mean by that? Because we represent that the church is the light of the world. The people of God, our faith represents that, and that represents yellow. But we realize at the heart that love is experienced first and foremost in the home, which represents red. You see, you're with your kids far more than we are. And we decided that if we to partner together, yellow and red, working in partnership makes orange. And so we come alongside because you are not alone in this. That's what parents struggle with most. It seems undaunting. How do I give a living legacy of faith to my kids? Here's how we work together with parents. Number one, if you're taking notes, number one, and that is this, by take-home resources to do with your kids. Whether your kids go to toddlers, whether your kids are in children's church, whether your kids are in youth, here's the deal. We work directly. You know, when kids are picked up out of children's church, they have take-home sheets. Parents, sometimes they're not even aware of it. All that stuff can get thrown away. And here's the deal, guys. If you got a system that's working for you, great. But all these are designed to do is create conversational starters or opportunities to work together with what we're doing, with what your kids are doing, and what you're doing in your household that you have greater impact. See, those things are designed so you can look at, here's one of the most humbling things you could do. You read one of your kids' things and go, wow, I didn't know that. Hey, guys, let's learn this together as a family. And just be honest that the church is your number one partner in bringing up your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. We give those kinds of resources to be able to provide because you say, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know how to start a conversation. All of this is designed. In fact, guys, why do you think I put notes in the bulletin every week? So you can just kind of throw them out when you leave church? Yeah, I don't know why, Pastor, again, this is something to doodle on during church. No, the idea is this, so you can talk about the things that you're learning. So that hopefully you as a family would discuss it more than Sunday morning to realize, okay, if this is what God is saying, how does this impact as a family? Let's talk about this. Hey, we're having dinner tonight. Here's the conversation starter. Pastor Ken taught on this week. Do y'all think he ate too much pizza the night before, or is that really what God is saying? Do we embrace that, or we just say, he's off on that one? Okay? Here's the deal. We can talk, we can grow, we can build a community of faith. So we give take-home resources. Secondly, this is we have legacy events to mark and prepare parents for significant transitions in kids' lives. Why? Because we know that in raising children, there are transitional points. Your kids Constantly think about it outside of the church. Your kids go through transitions where they go to school. You know, sometimes they go to preschool, then they go to big boy school, then they go to middle school, then they go to high school, then they go to college. Life is marked with transitions. They get married, they start careers constantly. And so the church comes along to recognize there are spiritual transition points that we want parents and the church to partner together with. So whether it's your kids graduating out of kindergarten and into children's church, we have events for the parents and the children to attend together. Whether it's a salvation issue, whether it's a baptismal issue. So we give instructions about how families can do these things together. See, all of this is here, guys, for your disposal. See, right now on Wednesday nights, we have a great youth service. We have an opportunity because you know why? As much as Sunday morning is great, but we need kids to be able to gather together with their peers, to hear it. And you know what? We have awesome things, but here's the deal, guys. The partnership is only as good as we work together. So why don't we bring our kids out? You know, I got to travel another night. Can't we just do everything on Sunday morning? That's what we compartmentalized faith to such a point where we teach our kids that. See, guys, I am not against extracurricular activities, but if everything else crowds out the primary and most, and why is imparting a spiritual legacy to our kids the most and primary responsibility of a parent? Because, guys, there is an eternity. There is an eternity. See, my parents didn't understand any better. They thought baptizing me as a kid made me a Christian. They didn't know. They didn't have any better instruction in that end. They didn't know. But you see, I came to recognize, man, I didn't know Jesus. It wasn't until I turned 20 years old that I came to know and accept him as my personal Lord and Savior. And I'm not disparaging the faith I was raised in. Here's the deal. I'm glad at least I knew about Jesus. But that was all it was. I knew about Jesus. I didn't know him personally. I didn't understand his plan for my life. And that's what our heart's desire is. Because why? Eternity is at stake. And every one of your kids represent awesome potential for God. But they need to know him personally. They need to know him individually. They need to know him for themselves. And we offer these opportunities so that through those times, through those areas, that you can work together. We can join as a tag team to see God's plans accomplished in your kids' lives. And so there, you have to reevaluate, how do we as a family make the things that are available something that becomes a priority to us? Because the Lord our God, he comes first. Okay? Thirdly, listen. We provide small groups for parents to build relationships and support in their roles. Whether you realize it or not, in small group offerings, both my children's pastor and my teen pastor, what they do is there are specialty small groups that are designed to do what? Bring people together that are going through the same issues of life in one. Because you know why? To form community. You're raising your kids when you're around other people that are going through the same things that you are. You can encourage one another. You can support one another. You can pray for one another. You can share best practices. Hey, what's working for you? I'll tell you what we failed at. And then don't hear and learn from each other. Grow together. There's no better way to build life-giving relationships than to share the most important facets of life in community. Community of people that are right there with you, going through the same things you are and the same times you are. You know, if you're raising a teenager, do you need support? Yes. I don't know about you, okay? And the fact of the matter is, if a teenager is in a household, do they need support? Yes, which is why we have small groups for teens, why we have them for kids. They need their peers. They need the people around them that they're going through life with. And parents need others around them so that we can work this out in the right way that God intended for our households. That we impart the responsibility of carrying on a legacy of faith to the coming generations. Those small groups are designed specifically to help people build life-giving relationships in the context of those shared realities of life. See, what's important to you, invest in. And that's why we provide the opportunities. And fourthly, listen, we provide Dream Team, opportunities to parents to give experience and develop skills. See, we don't get up here every week and beg you, we need people to work in children's church. What we provide is opportunities. Here's the deal. One of the best ways to gain experience and skills is to, if you're a parent, and listen, goes to everybody, because too many people, you've learned a lot about Jesus, but you have never found a way to meaningfully use what you've learned in a way that impacts others. And there's nothing more rewarding than to investing in kids and watching them to grow through the differences of life. See, the people who work back in our children's ministry are heroes to me. They give their lives. They sacrifice what so many people take for granted. They sacrifice to impart into our kids because they love it. But here's the deal, parents, we give this it's an opportunity. Why? Because you don't need the skill necessarily. If you need it, we'll help you with this. You don't need the necessary skill of how to change a diaper, but how to bring up a spiritual conversation, how to talk about it, how to make your faith fun, how to make it life-giving, how to impart it. When you join with others who have become experts because they've been doing it for years, they every week figure on how do we make church something that kids look forward to coming back to? How do we make this experience meaningful, that they will embrace it? How do we work together with their parents where they don't have to drag them to church, that the kids want to be here, the kids love it, and when we get around them, we can learn skills and opportunities for them so that at home, we can be as skillful in being able to bring spirituality to our households. And that end, you are not alone. All of these are ways that the church partners together with you. This is our heart for you guys, that you would embrace and see that you are not alone. Our primary and number one responsibility is to impart a legacy of spiritual faith to the coming generations.